Hello everybody, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Liberty Watch. I'm your host, Liberty Man Van, and today's topic is going to be political division as diversion. And we'll get to that in just a few minutes, but first I want to say a few things about taxation. Now, we've talked about taxation before. Part of being a libertarian is believing in the non-aggression principle, okay? And that means you can't hit people and you can't take their stuff. Now, what does taxation do? It basically takes your stuff by force. And if you don't pay your taxes, they'll come get you at some point. So basically, and I want to give an analogy between taxation and slavery, okay? Here it is, because ideas can change things. If 300 years ago you would have told someone, hey, you know what, I think we should abolish slavery. I think it's an evil institution, we should get rid of it. Well, you would have run into a lot of resistance. A lot of people would have told you, man, that's just a crazy idea. Don't you know, Plato said there was a certain class of people that was born to be slaves. Slavery's been around since the beginning of human history, as far as we know, at least since civilizations and cities came into being. So you would have run into a lot of resistance to this idea that slavery, we should get rid of slavery. Heck, they would have told you it's always been here and it will always be here. But somewhere along the line, people's attitudes actually changed about slavery. And the world began rejecting it. And if you ask someone today if they think slavery should be allowed, you're going to run into almost universal rejection of the idea. So an idea that was really mainstream at one time has become, we've kind of pushed it aside, okay? We've overcome that bad idea. And what I want to relate to you is taxation is another one of those bad ideas, coercive taxation. Because think about what it does, all right? It says, and let's just take the income tax, for example. What it says basically is that a certain percent of your labor that you do, a certain percent of your labor is going to be used to pay someone else. In other words, you're not going to get the full benefit of your labor. Sound familiar? You know, slavery was an extreme version of that, where slaves didn't get to keep any of what they earned or what of their labor. But taxation is the same way. We shouldn't make an exception just because this entity that steals from us, called government, we shouldn't make carve out a special niche for this thing just because it has the name of government. So ideas can be powerful. Now, how are we going to bring this about? To me, that needs to be done by people being educated and just coming to realize that they're partial slaves now. That's what taxation is. It makes a partial slave out of you, even if your neighbors voted for it. You know, in my community, we had a vote last year to increase the property taxes to go to the schools, okay? The schools needed more funding. My community voted in favor of it. I opposed increasing taxes because I know what happens when you give government more taxes. They're just going to waste it. They're asking for this increase in property taxes at the same time that we're building a new high school football stadium, several $1 million worth. And there's nothing wrong with the old stadium. Very nice stadium. But, you know, if people aren't spending their own money, so my point is though, even though you have voting, I got to go out and vote, I didn't get to vote for me individually. So that's what taxation is. How's that money going to be spent? So people in government get to decide how that money is going to be spent I want you to decide how that money is going to be spent. See the difference? And that's real freedom. Okay, now let's get to the topic of the day, which is political division as diversion. Now, the main idea behind this is that all of these apparent differences, you see the Republicans and Democrats just bickering with each other all the time, and there seems to be a lot of difference between the two, and there are some differences. However, on the big things that really matter, like growing the government and warfare, they're all on the same page. So the pretext of the show, of the idea today, is that this is kind of like a sleight of hand. You know, they want to divert your attention somewhere else and not talk about the things that really matter, like the national debt. Now, as I sit here in mid-February of 2017, we've just had another budget passed. Do I have my microphone on? Okay, whew, thought my microphone was off there for a second, but it was on, so I will continue. As we sit here in the middle of February 2017, we've got a Republican president and a Republican House and Senate. And the reason that I used to be a Republican but have rejected the Republican Party is because they talk a good game about being fiscally responsible, but when it comes right down to it, you just look at what happens to the federal debt when they're in control. Okay, when President Bush, Bush 2 had control of the House and the Senate, and he was a Republican, the deficits and the debt just mushroomed. And now we have President Trump, and they've passed a new budget deal. And of course, the Democrats went right along with them because they were getting what they wanted to, increase spending. At the same time, we're getting a tax cut. And I've said before, I'm all for tax cuts, giving people back more of the money that they earn. But at the same time, you need to cut spending. So right now, interest rates are low. What's going to happen when interest rates start rising? That's going to cause the government to owe even more money because their cost of borrowing is going to go up. They're going to have to pay higher interest rates. This is going to make it even harder. And so right now, the Congress keeps spending more of the money that it's taking in every year. $20 trillion in debt and counting. So basically, when you borrow, that's like a tax on future generations. And when these bonds, these U.S. Treasuries come up for renewal, how do they pay them off? Well, they issue new debt. They borrow more money. That's like taking using your MasterCard to pay off the debt, just the debt on your Visa. And you're not even paying off the Visa card. You're just paying enough on, the minimum payment you can pay on your Visa. So that's how the U.S. government is operating. It's using its Visa to pay for the MasterCard, or vice versa, however I said it. Using one credit card to pay for another. And, the national debt just keeps going up and up and up. Did I mention the national debt? That's right. The national debt amounts to $170,000 per taxpayer. Now, if you add unfunded liabilities to that tab, things like Medicare and Social Security that the government's promised people in the future, the tab goes up to about $1 million per taxpayer. Really? How many people do you know that make $1 million in a year, let's say? So $1 million per taxpayer, do you think we're ever going to be able to pay that off? And when do other countries realize that this is a big Ponzi scheme and that we're not going to be able to ultimately pay off all that debt? And then that's going to make the cost of our bonds rise. Okay, if you're bad debt and if you've got a bad credit history and you go to the bank and try to borrow some money, it's going to cost you more. If they even approve your loan, they're going to charge you a higher interest rate for it. When is the rest of the world going to figure out that, hey, we're never going to be able to pay this off, so let's quit lending these people money? Folks, it's going to come to a screeching halt at some point. Now, we can reverse this process. There's still time, but it needs to be tackled very soon. And do you hear this message from the mainstream media? It's like crickets out there. It never comes up. And so I blame the corporate media also for not ever even, they're just going along with what the politicians want to do. They're all in it together. The press, the Republicans, the Democrats. In the meantime, you and I, the taxpayers, are getting stuck with the tab here. And what do when some feces hits the fan? What happened in 2007 and 2008 when these banks got in trouble for making these bad bets on derivatives? Well, they took our tax dollars to bail them out. People, you got to realize the government is not looking out for you. So we need to get people in office that really believe in freedom. And freedom means, one of the things, common sense about freedom, if you're an individual and you're going out here each year and borrowing more money than you can pay off, you're kind of a slave to that debt, aren't you? And the politicians have made us a slave to the debt. So let's demand freedom. Let's demand people that are actually go in there and balance the budget. This should be a big issue, but it never even hits the radar screen. What does hit the radar screen is things like, during the Clinton administration, it was Monica Lewinsky, right? Let's make a big deal out of that. All right, let's talk about that on ad infinitum. And, recently Trump supposedly made some comment within a group, in a meeting of people that he was with, a small meeting. He referred to some of these third world countries as shithole countries. And that was big news for a few days. And we have more, something he supposedly said, not to the camera. Some snitch that was in the meeting went out, Dick Durbin, he's a Democrat, so he wanted to make Trump look bad and went out and leaked that to the press. He had to be the one that did it. Okay, so that's the type of crap we get from the mainstream media. Now, fortunately these days we have alternative media like myself, and I found an interesting article on this website called disobedientmedia.com, and the title of the article was "Political Division is a Hysterical Charade Maintained by Corporate Press." Kind of my idea, except I repackaged the name. And so look at this graphic right here. 49% of Americans believe the country is run for the benefit of a small elite. Exactly, just like I just said, they're not looking out for our interests up there. We need to realize that. Quit sending them so much money. We need to demand that they not rob so much from us so that they can spend it on their buddies. The Hill recently reported that a staggering 49% of Americans believe the country is run for the benefit of a small elite. In other words, a vast portion of Americans are at least superficially familiar with the concept that the media representation of U.S. politics does not serve the public at large, and it functions to a large extent as propaganda. So, like a professional magician, the politicians and mainstream media divert our attention from what's really important. Hey, look over here at this hand while I'm really doing the trick with the other hand. But I have you see the things that are really important we're not focusing on. So, for example, I just gave you this. But before I show you this video clip, the political parties, they want you to think they want you to think like you're in a tribe. All right, whatever my tribe, there's the Republican tribe and the Democratic tribe, right? And whatever my tribe does is all correct. Whatever that other tribe does is all evil. If you're in the Republican tribe, you watch Fox News. All right, if you're in the Democratic tribe, you can watch CNN or MSNBC, any of a number of stations. And so then they start this, it's this endless bickering, you know, on MSNBC or CNN. They're always, it's not about anything important. Trump, I mean, I'm going to give you the example here now. I'm going to show you this video here in just a second, but this is how they divert our attention away from things that are really important. They get to talking about stupid stuff like whether President Trump said shithole countries during a meeting. I mean, look at this.
Let's not kid ourselves. Let's not pretend or dance around it. The sentiment the president expressed today is a racist sentiment.
Personally, as someone from South Shithole, I'm offended, Mr. President. Okay, I'm offended.
I think the president's comments were ugly. I think they were disgusting. I think they were repulsive. I think they degraded the office of the president.
The president of the United States of America, we expect more of him. We expect him to be an example. We are growing democracies and we don't expect such remarks.
I'm sorry, but there's no other word one can use but racist. You cannot dismiss entire countries and continents as shitholes, whose entire populations, who are not white, are therefore not welcome.
I read those comments later last night. So first thing that came to my mind was very unfortunate, unhelpful.
I'm not surprised because, I mean, Donald Trump, we've always known that he's a racist. But when he does things like this, people need to realize that he's just trying to distract from all the stuff that's happening to him.
I think he's the shithole in this scenario. And I think he should probably just stop saying these childish things.
Do you think this president is racist?
Yeah, I do. I think at this point, I mean, the evidence is incontrovertible. It's right there.
And I can hear them now telling me, oh, Donald didn't mean that. Donald isn't a racist, or just people who don't know him. I think it was taken out of context. I'm not sure. How many examples do you need of this? But he is a racist.
Now back to the Disobedient Media article. Disobedient Media recently reported an establishment Democrats' subversion of the democratic process in the 2016 primary race, and their attempts to deflect from the revelation of their corruption by focusing exclusively on the largely discredited Russian hacking narrative. Allegations of Russian hacking, then Russian collusion, then Russian social media trolls consumed corporate media attention for what seemed like the entirety of 2017. So they've got this real subversion of the democratic process going on. Behind the scenes, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was the Democratic National Convention chairman during the 2016 campaign, during the primaries. So it was Hillary Clinton in the primaries versus Bernie Sanders, and it was pretty close. And Sanders might have won the nomination if they hadn't, in the back, behind the scenes, rigging the process in favor of Hillary Clinton. That's real rigging of the process right there. But that story was over with in a few days. You know, it lasted for a little while, and then boom, forget about that. Trump's elected. We've got to make up this thing about the Russians hacking the election and, you know, Trump being in cahoots with the Russians. Several months now they've investigated this. No truth behind it whatsoever. Okay? For months and months this has been the story on CNN. Oh, the Trump tribe was guilty of colluding with the Russians to try to swing the election. And after months and months, I've even got an investigator on it. Haven't found a thing. Meanwhile, everybody's forgotten about the real hacking of the election done to cheat Bernie Sanders out of the nomination for the Democratic Party for president. So let's continue. Wasserman Schultz was elected chairperson of the Democratic National Committee in May 2011. This is from the article again. Replacing Virginia Senator Tim Kaine. On July 24, 2016, Wasserman Schultz announced her resignation from her position after WikiLeaks released a collection of hacked emails indicating that Wasserman Schultz and other members of the DNC staff showed bias against the presidential campaign of Senator Bernie Sanders in favor of Hillary Clinton's campaign. Her resignation was finalized on July 28 following the 2016 Democratic National Convention. So we have a real life version of collusion which doesn't, you know, and it stays a very short period of time in the news cycle and then it gets buried. So, and again, back to this article, this disobedientmedia.com article. Leading congressional Democrats have spent the last year relentlessly accusing Donald Trump of being controlled by or treasonously loyal to a hostile foreign power. Over the last several months, they have added to those disloyalty charges a new set of alleged crimes, abusing the powers of the executive branch, including the Justice Department and FBI, to vindictively punish political opponents while corruptively protecting the serious crimes of his allies, including his own family members and possibly himself. One would hope and expect that those who genuinely view Trump as a menace of this magnitude and view themselves as resistance fighters would do everything within their ability to impose as many limits and safeguards as possible on the powers he is able to wield. But yesterday in Washington, congressional Democrats were presented with a critical opportunity to do exactly that, in other words, to limit Trump's powers. A proposed new amendment was scheduled to be voted on in the House of Representatives that would have imposed meaningful limits and new safeguards on Trump's ability to exercise one of the most dangerous, invasive, and historically abused presidential powers: spying on the communications of American citizens without warrants. Now we're talking about the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act that's been abused. And since this disobedient media article has been published, there's new news that has come out to indicate that the head of the FBI, James Comey, they got this fake dossier on Trump. The dossier, you know, implicated that maybe Trump had been colluding with the Russians. So they went to this FISA court to say one of Trump's associates, to see if they could spy on him, one of Trump's associates. And when they went before the FISA court, they presented them with this fake dossier, and James Comey knew it was fake. But that didn't matter. So in other words, this is while Obama was still president. So Obama is having his FBI director go behind the scenes in the Department of Justice. They were in on it too, getting this ability to spy on one of Trump's associates during the campaign. Well, obviously, Trump's going to be talking to the guy. So when they wiretap him and listen to him, they're going to hear Trump say something, and you know Trump may say something to implicate himself. He didn't, because there was nothing to this Russian collusion story. But here is Obama using the Department of Justice and the FBI to go after political opponents. Folks, these clowns up there cannot be trusted for a minute. Let's get back to the article. So what they're fighting over here in this, there was a chance for them to clip some of, the spies in Washington to cut down on their ability to spy on American citizens. A substantial minority of GOP lawmakers have long opposed warrantless surveillance of Americans and thus announced their intention to support new safeguards. Indeed, the primary sponsor and advocate of the amendment to provide new domestic spying safeguards was the conservative Republican from Michigan, Justin Amash. To secure enactment of these safeguards, Amash needed support from a majority of House Democrats. That meant that House Democrats held the power in their hands to decide whether Trump, the president they have been vocally vilifying as a lawless tyrant threatening American democracy, would be subjected to serious limits and safeguards on how his FBI could spy on the conversations of American citizens. In other words, the Democrats are out there beating the drum about how horrible Trump is, and then they go give him this new power. See, this is the political division as diversion. Hey, the Trump, he's a bad guy, he's a bad guy, he's a bad guy, he's horrible. But we believe in a large state, and we believe it's okay to spy on our citizens, so we'll have to vote with Trump on this one, right? And so back to the article. Debate on the bill and the amendments began on the House floor yesterday afternoon, and it became quickly apparent that leading Democrats intended to side with Trump and against those within their own party who favored imposing safeguards on the Trump administration's ability to engage in domestic surveillance. Leading the charge against reforms with the FBI's domestic spying powers was Representative Adam Schiff of California, the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee who, on countless TV appearances, was strongly insinuated, or has strongly insinuated, if not outright stated, that Trump is controlled by and loyal to Russian President Vladimir Putin. So the guy that didn't do anything to block Trump's authority could have rolled back some of the authority that Trump had to spy on Americans. Didn't do so when the vote actually came up. Here he is on television railing about how dangerous President Trump is.
About Russian efforts to contact Hope Hicks. What do you make of this continued effort to permeate President Trump's inner circle?
Well, without getting the specifics of that allegation, we do know that the Russians throughout the campaign were making outreach to the campaign. They continue that during the transition, including some of the people they had talked to during the campaign, and obviously even after that point. So this is part of a concerted Russian influence operation that never stopped. We've also seen a lot of what we saw during the campaign in terms of Russian social media intervention never stop. The only issue I took when James Comey testified that the Russians will be back is they've never left in terms of certain parts of their active measures campaign, but it's not at all a surprise that they would make outreach to people they thought would have influence in the administration and misrepresent who they were and what their agenda was.
That's right. Democrat Adam Schiff is all worried about Trump and his power, votes to continue to give him the power to, his FBI, the power to illegally spy on American citizens. So, and who else voted for it in favor of the bill, or didn't vote to strip some of the powers the FBI has under this legislation? Former DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz. That's right. So, the disobedientmedia.com article continues. The vote ripped the mask from the pretense of differentiation between the Democratic Party and Republicans and highlighted instead the troubling bipartisan support among lawmakers for increasing the power of the American deep state. Another area where the Democrats and Republicans always seem to agree is on foreign policy. We're continuously in a war. We've been in a war in Afghanistan since, about 2001? 16 years and counting. We're sitting here in 2017. It's hardly ever discussed in the media. If it comes up in the media, it's not if we should be there, but how we should conduct the campaign, you see. There's so much agreement on the things that really matter. And did you know that people probably don't even know there's a civil war going on in Yemen, and that there's two factions there, one of them backed by Iran, and another of the factions is backed by Saudi Arabia. And we're on the side of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, who's conducted a blockade of the Yemen's ports, which has caused significant hunger, and there was a cholera outbreak there. So whole lots of people dying there, and we've got our hand in there too, and that never comes up on television. How about Somalia, Libya? Let's just go back and talk about United States foreign policy in the Middle East since 9/11. We've already talked about Afghanistan, 16 years there and counting. Let's just look at the numbers on Afghanistan. Over 2,300 United States soldiers have died, and more than 20,000 have been wounded. And an estimated 150,000 total humans have died in Afghanistan and Pakistan since 2001, and there's no end in sight. How about the 2003 invasion of Iraq? Now, the U.S. pretense for entering that war was that we had to stop Saddam Hussein because he had weapons of mass destruction. These chemical weapons that he might unleash on his people. Well, as it turned out, that was a big lie. There were no weapons of mass destruction. So anyway, this war in Iraq, let's look at the numbers on it. By the way, after the war, what we have there now is kind of a chaotic situation, various factions fighting for power. And so the war has just created chaos. And, the factions continue fighting with each other. We've strengthened Iran's hand in the area because the Shiites are in control now. It was the Sunnis under Saddam Hussein. But under Saddam Hussein, he kind of kept everything in check, He kept all the factions from killing each other. So the Iraq War overthrew the Sunnis, and now the Shiites are in control there. And so Iran is Shia, predominantly Shia, so that strengthened their hand in the region. But let's look at some more of the numbers here in Iraq. So for all of that, to strengthen Iran's hand, which we're supposed to be opposed to, so what have we gotten for all the blood and treasure that we've spent in Iraq? Let's look at the numbers here. about 500,000 Iraqi citizens, 500,000 have been killed, more than 4,500 U.S. soldiers, and more than 32,000 have come back wounded. Because that's what we've gotten for our efforts in Iraq. Now, and back to Afghanistan for just a second. You know, it was started under Bush, continued under Obama, and now continued under Trump. So it doesn't really matter. And Obama ran as the anti-war candidate. Trump ran as the anti-war candidate. But all we get is more war. Once they get in there, there's this set of people around them that start to influence them. Even if they go in thinking we shouldn't be in all these foreign conflicts. That's what Trump said during the campaign. But he surrounds himself with generals now. Okay? The neoconservatives are in control of our foreign policy, the warmongers. Let's continue. American people are tired of all this warfare. That's what I think one of the things they were trying to say during the election of 2016. They were and just fed up with the status quo. Let's not forget about Libya. Obama went in and took out Muammar Gaddafi. And so after that happened, it's just made it easier. We've had a real rapid, with the confusion there, we've had just a rapid influx of people from Africa going through Libya and crossing over from Libya, crossing the Mediterranean Sea into southern Europe, into Italy. And so we've had this mass migration of Muslim immigrants into Western Europe. Western Europe's been overrun with it. So that's been the result of our bright idea to knock off another secular ruler in Libya. You'd think we'd learned our lesson after knocking off the secular ruler Saddam Hussein in Iraq and how that worked out. But no, there are people around the president that want to always maintain an aggressive foreign policy. And you remember us talking about the national debt? Even if you think all these wars are necessary, and they're certainly not, we can't afford them. And we're creating more and more enemies across the world, particularly in the Middle East. So that's not serving American, it's not making us any safer. And it's costly. We can't afford to continue all these conflicts. We can't pay for Social Security and Medicare, much less all these foreign wars. So I hope you've kind of gotten the idea, the crux of my argument today, that you know, nobody in Washington is really looking out for you. So anyway, anytime we have an opportunity to cut back on government, that's going to leave us in more control. Before I leave you today, though, I want to show you a little video clip from my favorite comedian of all time, George Carlin. He's not fooled by all this.
They're irrelevant. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets, and they own all the big media news, all the big media companies. So they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. You know something? They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. And by the way, it's the same big club they use to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged, and nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hard-working people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hard-working people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these rich cocksuckers who don't give a fuck about them. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you at all, at all, at all.
Now, whenever we're in a war, you'll hear these people say, don't say anything bad about the war effort, support our troops. And I agree with that. We should support our troops. However, one way you support the troops is you tell the leaders who are controlling them to make sure that you're not sending them into harm's way for no good reason. Now, when people sign up for the military, their commanders tell them what to do. There's no choice in it for them anymore. That's what they're signing up for. And a lot of them, if not all of them, sign up because multiple reasons. Sure, maybe they need some money to go to college. That's part of it. But also, they believe that they're signing up to help defend America. So we need to make sure that when we put our military into harm's way, that it's for vital security interests, okay? Not for the interests of McDonnell Douglas or Boeing, not for the interest of corporations, but because there's a good reason for it. That's the best way, in my opinion, we can support the military, is by pressuring our leaders, our political leaders, not to put them in harm's way for no good reason. Okay, that's our show for today. I'm glad you could join us. Please tell a friend. We'd like to grow the show. And you can find my website, my blog at libertymanvan.com. That's Liberty Man Van, just one word. That's where my blog is. And you can click on hyperlinks there to get to my videos. Or you can find me on YouTube as Liberty Man Van, 3 words. Thanks for joining us today, and be sure to be here next time for another edition of Liberty Watch, where we don't believe you need some guy with a bullhorn to tell you what to do.